The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored paper with gold embossing that caught the light from my kitchen window. You are cordially invited to the graduation ceremony of Timothy Richardson, magna cum laude, College of Engineering. My grandson's name, printed in elegant script, made my chest tighten with pride. Below it, in smaller font, reception to follow in the dean's private dining room. I set the invitation against my coffee mug and stared at it for a long moment. 22 years old Timothy was. I remembered the night he was born, how my son Robert had called me at 2 a.m, voice thick with exhaustion and wonder. Mom, he's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and he's got your stubborn chin. That stubborn chin had gotten Timothy through calculus and physics, through late nights in the engineering lab, through the doubts that plagued him sophomore year when he called me crying about switching majors. Grandma Helen, he'd said, I don't think I'm smart enough for this. I'd driven 3 hours to his campus that weekend, sat in his dorm room, and told him about the first adult I'd taught to read, a 60-year-old janitor named Frank who thought he was too old to learn anything new. Smart isn't about age, Timothy, I'd said. It's about persistence. And you, my dear boy, are the most persistent person I know. Now he was graduating magna cum laude, and his father, my son Robert, was the dean of the College of Engineering. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd taught Robert to read before he started kindergarten, who'd driven him to every academic competition, who'd worked double shifts as a librarian to pay for his college textbooks, would now sit in an audience watching him preside over his own son's graduation. I traced the invitation's embossed border with my finger. The paper was expensive, the kind that whispered of prestige and accomplishment. So different from the hand-drawn invitations I used to make for Robert's birthday parties, construction paper and glitter glue, hung on our refrigerator next to his spelling tests and math worksheets. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. Mom? Robert's voice, careful and measured. Even his phone calls had become formal over the years. Did you get Timothy's invitation? I did. I'm so proud of him, Robert. Magna cum laude. Yes, well. He cleared his throat. Listen, about the reception afterward. Diana thinks... He paused, and I could hear her voice in the background, sharp and insistent. She thinks it might be better if you skip that part. The reception, I mean. It's going to be quite formal, and there will be board members there, donors, that sort of thing. Diana. My daughter-in-law of 15 years, who'd never once called me by my name. It was always Robert's mother, or Mrs. Fowler, when she couldn't avoid addressing me directly, as if using my first name might somehow diminish her own importance. I see, I said quietly. And what do you think, Robert? Another pause. Longer this time. I think it's probably for the best. You know how these things are. Very political. No, I didn't know how these things were. I'd never been invited to find out. Of course, I said, keeping my voice steady. I understand perfectly. You're not upset, are you? You can still come to the ceremony. That's the important part. The important part. I closed my eyes and remembered Robert at 5 years old, standing on a chair in our tiny kitchen, helping me make cookies for his school bake sale. Mom, when I grow up, I want to be just like you, he'd said, flour dusting his dark hair. I want to help people learn things. No, Robert, I said into the phone. I'm not upset at all. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the invitation. The afternoon sun moved across the room, casting long shadows that stretched and shifted like the years between then and now. I thought about the woman I'd been at 35, raising Robert alone after his father left, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I thought about the woman I'd been at 45, putting myself through night school to get my master's degree in adult education while Robert was in high school. I thought about the woman I'd been at 55, launching the literacy program that had become my life's work. And I thought about the woman I was now, at 67, being told I didn't fit in with the dean's family. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Elaine White answered on the second ring. Helen, how are you, dear? Elaine had been my assistant director at the Literacy Center for 12 years before retiring last spring. More than that, she'd been my friend, my confidant. the person who'd stayed late with me on countless evenings as we planned curriculum and celebrated small victories. "I'm well," I said. "Elaine, I need to ask you something. The Aurora Foundation dinner next month. Am I still scheduled to speak?" "Of course you are. You're our keynote speaker. 30 years of adult education, changing lives. One word at a time. It's going to be wonderful." "Why?" I looked at the invitation again, at the gold embossing that suddenly seemed garish rather than elegant. "Just checking. Can you send me the details again? I want to make sure I have everything right." "Absolutely. Helen, is everything okay? You sound—" "I'm fine," I said. And for the first time in months, I actually meant it. "I'm just planning ahead." After we hung up, I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind the everyday blouses and comfortable slacks, hung a dress I'd bought 2 years ago for the State Education Awards ceremony. Red silk with a subtle sheen, elegant, but not flashy. The kind of dress that commanded respect without demanding attention. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. It still had the tags on it. I'd been too nervous to wear it to the awards ceremony, had chosen something safer instead. But looking at it now, I realized it was perfect. Classic, sophisticated, timeless. The kind of dress an honored guest would wear. I hung it on the outside of the closet door where I could see it every morning. A reminder of who I was, who I'd always been, even when others forgot. My phone buzzed with a text message from Timothy. "Grandma, Dad said you might not come to the reception. Please say you'll still be there. It won't be the same without you." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart clenching. This beautiful, earnest young man who still called me every Sunday, who sent me pictures of his engineering projects, who'd driven to my house last Christmas just to make sure I wasn't spending it alone. He had no idea what his parents had done, what they'd asked of me. I typed back, "I'll be there for everything that matters, sweetheart." I wouldn't miss it for the world. It wasn't a lie. I would be there for everything that mattered. I would be there for Timothy's moment of triumph, for the recognition of his hard work and dedication. I would be there to witness the culmination of everything I'd taught him about persistence and dignity. And I would be there to show Robert and Diana exactly what they'd tried to exclude from their perfect political world. The invitation sat on my kitchen table, catching the last rays of afternoon sun. Tomorrow, I would call the Aurora Foundation and confirm every detail of my speech. I would press my red dress and polish my grandmother's pearl necklace. I would prepare for Timothy's graduation with the same care I'd once prepared for Robert's. But tonight, I would remember who I was before I became someone's inconvenient mother, someone's embarrassing mother-in-law. I would remember Helen Fowler, educator, advocate, the woman who taught 6,000 adults to read, the woman who was about to teach her own family a lesson they'd never forget. The morning of Timothy's graduation dawned crisp and clear, the kind of May Day that made everything seem possible. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my red dress, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The woman looking back at me was composed, dignified, a far cry from the broken-hearted grandmother who'd received that phone call 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, I'd done my homework. The Aurora Foundation dinner was being held at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, the same venue where Timothy's reception would take place. Same building, different floors. The Foundation's event was scheduled for 7 o'clock, precisely 1 hour after the graduation ceremony ended, and 30 minutes after the dean's reception was set to begin. I'd confirmed every detail with Elaine twice. The program listed me as the keynote speaker. Dr. Helen Fowler, founder of the Valley Adult Literacy Program, recipient of the National Adult Education Award, educator who has taught over 6,000 adults to read and write. 6,000. The number still amazed me sometimes. 6,000 people who'd walked into my classroom believing they were too old, too stupid, too broken to learn. 6,000 people who'd walked out knowing they were none of those things. My phone buzzed. A text from Timothy. "Ceremony starts at 4. Are you coming early? I'd love to see you before it starts." I smiled and typed back, "I'll be there, sweetheart. Break a leg." Actually, I'd been there since noon. I'd spent the morning in the hotel's business center, reviewing my speech one final time. printing out a clean copy. Then I'd taken a walk through the campus, past the library where I'd worked for 23 years, past the continuing education building where I'd taught my first adult literacy class in 1987. The memories flooded back as I walked. Margaret Todd Whitman, my first student, a 45-year-old woman who'd hidden her illiteracy for decades, pretending to read menus in restaurants, asking cashiers to remind her of the total when she couldn't read the receipt, the tears in her eyes when she read her first complete sentence aloud. The cat sat on the mat. Such a simple sentence, but it had unlocked a world for her. Then there was Warren Schmoke, a Vietnam veteran who'd dropped out of school at 14 to work in the steel mills. He'd come to my class angry, defiant, convinced that formal education was for other people. 6 months later, he was reading Steinbeck and writing poetry about his war experiences. He'd gone on to get his GED, then his bachelor's degree. He'd become a counselor at the VA hospital, helping other veterans navigate their benefits paperwork. One by one, they'd filled my classroom. Construction workers who couldn't read safety manuals. Mothers who couldn't help their children with homework. Immigrants who spoke perfect English but couldn't navigate written forms. Elderly people who'd been too embarrassed to admit they'd never learned. Each one had their own story, their own reason for being there, their own moment of triumph when the letters finally made sense. And I'd been there for all of it. Through budget cuts and program changes, through skeptical administrators who thought adult literacy was a waste of resources, through my own moments of doubt when I wondered if I was making any real difference. I'd been there when Robert was climbing the academic ladder, when he was too busy with his dissertation to call, when he was courting Diana and suddenly my working-class roots became something to apologize for rather than celebrate. I'd been there when Timothy was born, when Diana made it clear that my babysitting services weren't needed. We prefer professional childcare, you understand. I'd been there when Robert got his first teaching position, his first promotion, his appointment as department head, and finally, his elevation to dean. I'd been there for all of it, whether they wanted me there or not. Now I was here for Timothy's graduation, and I was exactly where I needed to be. At 3:30, I made my way to the university's main auditorium. The ceremony was being held in the largest venue on campus, a beautiful space with soaring ceilings and acoustic panels that would carry every word to the back row. I'd spoken here myself, years ago, at the annual faculty recognition ceremony. I remembered the way my voice had echoed in the vastness, the way the lights had made everything seem both intimate and grand. I found a seat in the middle section, close enough to see Timothy's face when his name was called, far enough back to avoid the reserved sections where Robert and Diana would be sitting. Around me, families were gathering, parents with cameras, grandparents with programs, siblings fidgeting in their dress clothes. The air buzzed with excitement and pride. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Nothing from Robert, but that wasn't surprising. He was probably busy with his dean duties, making sure everything ran smoothly. Diana would be holding court somewhere, playing the part of the gracious academic wife, accepting congratulations on her son's achievements as if she'd had anything to do with them. The thought made my jaw tighten. Diana, who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd married Robert when he was already established in his career, who'd spent the last 15 years rewriting family history to minimize my role in Robert's success. According to Diana's version of events, Robert had been a naturally gifted student who'd succeeded despite his humble beginnings, not because of the mother who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. I thought about the night Robert had called me, sobbing during his first semester of graduate school. "I can't do this, Mom. I'm not smart enough. I don't belong here." I'd driven 6 hours through a snowstorm to reach him, had sat in his cramped apartment until dawn, reviewing his research proposal word by word, helping him see the brilliance in his own ideas. When he'd defended his dissertation 5 years later, I'd been in the audience, bursting with pride as he thanked his committee, his fellow students, his loving family, without ever mentioning my name. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin momentarily." The auditorium settled into expectant silence. I straightened my shoulders and smoothed my dress, the red silk cool and reassuring under my hands. In a few hours, I would stand on another stage, in another auditorium, and speak to an audience that actually wanted to hear what I had to say. But first, I would watch my grandson graduate. I would witness the moment when Timothy Richardson, magna cum laude, walked across that stage and received his diploma from Dean Robert Fowler. I would see the pride in Timothy's eyes, the joy in his smile, the culmination of everything he'd worked for. And I would remember why I'd done everything I'd done. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but for moments like this. For the satisfaction of watching someone I'd helped reach their full potential. The processional music began, and faculty members in their colorful academic robes filed onto the stage. I spotted Robert immediately. Tall, distinguished, wearing the elaborate ceremonial robes that marked his position as dean. He looked every inch the successful academic, the respected administrator. My son, who'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a grocery store, who'd worn hand-me-down clothes and carried his lunch to school in a paper bag, now commanded a stage in front of 1,000 people. I felt a complicated mix of emotions watching him. Pride, yes, that would never fade, but also a deep sadness for the distance that had grown between us. For the son who'd learned to be embarrassed by the woman who'd made his success possible. The graduates began filing in, and I craned my neck to spot Timothy among them. There he was, 4th row, trying to look serious and ceremonial, but unable to hide the grin that kept breaking across his face. My heart swelled with love for this young man who'd never forgotten where he came from, who'd never treated me like an inconvenience or an embarrassment. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Welcome remarks, invocation, a speech from the valedictorian. I half listened, my mind already moving ahead to what would come next. In exactly 90 minutes, I would be introduced to a ballroom full of education advocates, foundation board members, and community leaders. I would take the stage and tell them about the power of literacy, about the transformation that happened when someone learned to read their first complete sentence, about the ripple effects of education that spread through families and communities. And somewhere above me, Robert would be hosting his reception. Diana would be playing the perfect hostess, and neither of them would have any idea that the woman they'd excluded from their celebration was about to become the most important person in the building. The president of the university rose to introduce the keynote speaker, a prominent alumnus who'd donated millions to the engineering program. I watched Robert lean forward in his chair, his attention focused on the proceedings. He was good at this, I had to admit. He commanded respect, spoke with authority, carried himself with the dignity his position demanded. I wondered if he ever thought about the woman who'd taught him how to speak with confidence, who'd made him practice presentations in front of the bathroom mirror, who'd driven him to forensics tournaments and debate competitions. Did he remember that the poise he displayed now had been hard-won, built through years of encouragement and support? The keynote speaker finished to enthusiastic applause, and the president returned to the podium. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Dean Robert Fowler will present our graduates. Robert stood, his movements graceful and confident. He began calling names, and one by one, the graduates walked across the stage. Each handshake was brief but warm, each congratulation personal and heartfelt. Whatever else I might feel about my son, I could see that he genuinely cared about these students, that he took pride in their achievements. Timothy Richardson, magna cum laude, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. My grandson strode across the stage, his smile brilliant, his handshake with his father firm and proud. For a moment, watching them together, I felt only joy. This was what mattered. This moment of achievement, this celebration of hard work and determination. But as Timothy took his diploma and posed for the official photograph, I caught sight of Diana in the front row. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the emotional mother, accepting congratulations from the people around her. And I remembered exactly why I was here. In 2 hours, Diana would discover that the woman she'd deemed unfit for her reception was about to receive a standing ovation from some of the most influential people in the state. The ceremony concluded with the traditional cap toss, and the auditorium erupted in celebration. I remained seated as families surged forward to congratulate their graduates, content to watch the chaos from a distance. Timothy would be surrounded by well-wishers, swept up in the excitement of the moment. There would be time to congratulate him later. Right now, I had somewhere else to be, someone else to become. I gathered my purse and program, smoothed my dress one final time, and made my way toward the exit. The woman who'd been excluded from her own grandson's reception was about to make her entrance somewhere else entirely. And this time, she'd be the guest of honor. The elevator ride to the third floor felt like an eternity. I watched the numbers climb, 2, 3, and felt my heart hammering against my ribs. Not from nervousness, but from anticipation. After 3 weeks of careful planning, after years of being dismissed and marginalized, the moment had finally arrived. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into the hallway that led to the dean's private dining room. The corridor was elegant, lined with portraits of distinguished alumni and faculty members. I recognized several faces, professors I'd worked with during my years at the university library, colleagues from the continuing education department, people who'd respected my work, who'd never questioned my right to be in their presence. Through the glass doors of the dining room, I could see the reception in full swing. Wait staff circulated with silver trays, guests clustered in small groups, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with the clink of crystal glasses. It looked exactly as I'd imagined. Refined, exclusive, the kind of event that Diana lived for. I spotted Timothy immediately. He stood near the windows, still in his cap and gown, surrounded by a small group of faculty members who were congratulating him on his achievement. His face glowed with happiness, and I felt a stab of pure love for this young man who'd never forgotten to call his grandmother, who'd never been embarrassed by my working-class roots or my unfashionable clothes. Robert was holding court near the bar, discussing something with animated gestures to a group of men in expensive suits, board members probably, or major donors. He looked comfortable, confident, completely in his element. This was his world now, and he wore it like a well-tailored jacket. And there was Diana, resplendent in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 5 years. She was laughing at something a distinguished-looking woman was saying, her hand resting possessively on the arm of a man I recognized as the university president, the perfect dean's wife, gracious and charming, accepting congratulations as if Timothy's success was somehow her personal triumph. I took a deep breath and pushed open the glass doors. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but there was a shift, a subtle tension that rippled through the room. Several faculty members nodded at me with warm smiles. They remembered me from my years at the university, from committees we'd served on together, from the literacy program that had brought recognition to the continuing education department. But it was Diana's reaction that I was watching for. Her eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the exact moment she registered my presence. Her smile faltered, her face went pale, and she actually took a step backward, as if my mere presence was somehow threatening. "Helen!" Timothy's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. He broke away from his group of admirers and strode toward me, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "Grandma, you made it. I was worried when Dad said—" He stopped, glancing around the room with sudden awareness. "I'm so glad you're here." I embraced him warmly, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the lingering traces of graduation day excitement. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Over Timothy's shoulder, I watched Diana lean close to Robert, whispering something urgent in his ear. Robert's expression darkened, and he began making his way toward us, his smile forced and brittle. "Mom." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the undertone of panic. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," I replied pleasantly, keeping my arm around Timothy's shoulders. "But I had some time before my other engagement, and I couldn't resist stopping by to congratulate my grandson." "Your other engagement?" Diana had appeared at Robert's side, her face flushed with barely contained anger. "Mrs. Fowler, I thought we made it clear that this was a private function." I looked at her directly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. You did make several things clear, Diana, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm only here for a moment. Good, she said, her voice sharp. Because as I mentioned to Robert, this is a very exclusive gathering. We have board members here, major donors, people who what? I interrupted, my voice still pleasant, but with an edge of steel. People who might be offended by the presence of a retired librarian? People who might think less of Timothy because his grandmother worked for a living. The conversation around us had definitely quieted now. I could feel eyes turning toward us, curious and uncomfortable. Timothy looked mortified, caught between his love for me and his awareness that something was terribly wrong. That's not what I meant, Diana said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's just that this is a very formal event and I don't fit in with your crowd, I finished. Yes, you made that perfectly clear 3 weeks ago. You told Robert that I didn't belong with the dean's family. Robert's face went ashen. Mom, please, this isn't the time or place. Oh, but it is exactly the time and place, I said, my voice carrying further than I'd intended. More heads were turning now, more conversations stopping, because I think it's important that people understand exactly what kind of family the dean comes from. I turned to address the room at large, my voice clear and strong. My name is Helen Fowler. I'm Timothy's grandmother, and I'm the woman who raised Robert from the time he was 3 years old. I'm the woman who worked 2 jobs to pay for his education, who helped him with his homework every night, who drove him to every academic competition and debate tournament. I'm the woman who taught him to read, who believed in him when he doubted himself, who sacrificed everything to give him the opportunities that led him to this position. The room had gone completely silent now. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear. Diana looked like she was about to faint, and Timothy was staring at me with wide eyes. I'm also, I continued, the woman who was told 3 weeks ago that she didn't fit in with this family, that she wasn't suitable for this reception, that her presence might embarrass the dean in front of his important guests. Helen, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper, please don't do this. Don't do what, Robert? Don't tell the truth? Don't remind people that you didn't spring fully formed from the forehead of Zeus? Don't mention that your success was built on the sacrifices of a woman who apparently isn't good enough to celebrate your son's achievements? I looked around the room, making eye contact with faces I recognized. I want all of you to know that I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I love my grandson, and I'm proud of his accomplishments. But I'm also here to make something clear. I turned back to Diana, who was now gripping Robert's arm like a lifeline. You seem to be under the impression that I'm somehow diminished by your rejection, that being excluded from your little party somehow makes me less than I am. But let me tell you something, Diana. In about an hour, I'm going to walk downstairs to the grand ballroom, where I'm the keynote speaker at the Aurora Foundation dinner. I'm going to address an audience of education advocates, foundation board members, and community leaders. I'm going to be introduced as Dr. Helen Fowler, the educator who taught 6,000 adults to read and write. The silence in the room was deafening. Diana's face had gone from pale to red to white again, cycling through emotions faster than I could track them. 6,000 people, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. 6,000 people who believed they were too old, too stupid, too broken to learn. 6,000 people who discovered that education isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about persistence, dedication, and the willingness to help others reach their potential. I looked directly at Robert, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to help me grade papers at the kitchen table, who used to tell me he wanted to be a teacher just like his mom. Those 6,000 people never once questioned whether I belonged in their classroom. They never suggested that my working-class background made me unsuitable to teach them. They never implied that my presence might embarrass them in front of their friends. Timothy stepped forward, his face flushed with emotion. Grandma, I had no idea. I never knew they— Of course you didn't, sweetheart, I said gently. This isn't about you. This is about respect and dignity, and the difference between earned achievement and inherited snobbery. I turned back to Diana, who was now openly staring at me with something that might have been fear. You wanted to exclude me from your celebration because you were ashamed of me. Because you thought I wasn't good enough for your circle. But the truth is, Diana, you're not good enough for mine. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around us, the room remained frozen, guests holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I've spent 30 years of my life proving that everyone deserves respect, that everyone has value, that everyone deserves a chance to succeed regardless of their background. But I've also learned that some people are so small, so insecure, so desperate to appear important that they can only build themselves up by tearing others down. I looked around the room one more time, then back at Timothy. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I'm proud of the education you've earned. But I'm also proud of myself, and I'm done pretending to be less than I am to make other people comfortable. I kissed Timothy's cheek, squeezed his hand, and walked toward the door. As I reached it, I turned back for one final look at Diana, who was still standing frozen in the middle of the room. Oh, and Diana? When you're introduced at social events from now on, you might want to mention that you're married to the son of the woman who taught 6,000 people to read. It might actually give you some credibility. I walked out of the room with my head high, leaving behind a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I sank against the wall, my hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. It was done. After years of swallowing my pride, of accepting their dismissal, of pretending that their rejection didn't hurt, I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally shown them exactly who they were trying to exclude. Now came the real test. In 30 minutes, I would walk onto another stage, in front of another audience, and prove that their opinion of me mattered less than nothing. The elevator chimed softly as we reached the ground floor. Time to show them what a real reception looked like. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel had been transformed into something magical. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece a careful arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus. The stage at the far end was bathed in soft spotlights, a podium waiting center stage like a throne. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. This was different from the sterile formality of the dean's reception upstairs. Here, there was warmth, energy, the buzz of people genuinely excited to be together. These were educators, advocates, philanthropists, people who understood that real worth wasn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the lives you touched and the difference you made. Dr. Fowler, Elaine White appeared at my elbow, radiant in a burgundy evening gown. You look absolutely stunning. Are you ready for this? I smoothed my red dress, the silk cool and reassuring under my palms. I've been ready for 30 years. She laughed, that warm, genuine sound I'd missed since her retirement. The foundation board is beside themselves with excitement. Janet Waters has been telling everyone about your work with the Immigrant Literacy Program. And Louise Qualls. You remember Louise from the State Education Department. She's been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen. I did remember Louise. She'd been instrumental in securing state funding for our programs, had fought bureaucratic battles I never even knew about. It was humbling to realize how many people had been working behind the scenes to support the work I'd thought I was doing alone. How many people are we expecting? I asked, though I could already see the ballroom filling up. 350, Elaine said with pride. We had to add extra tables. The governor's wife is here, the mayor, the entire city council. Oh, and Helen. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. The publisher of the Herald is at table 12. She's been asking about doing a feature story on your program. 350 people. I thought about the 42 guests at the dean's reception upstairs, their careful conversations and political maneuvering. This was different. This was a celebration of something real. 10 minutes to showtime, Elaine said, squeezing my arm. I'll be right here cheering you on. As she hurried away to check on last-minute details, I found myself alone for a moment in the growing crowd. I closed my eyes and let the sounds wash over me. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft jazz ensemble playing in the corner. This was my world. These were my people. My phone buzzed. A text message from Timothy. Grandma, what happened up there? Everyone's been talking. Dad looks like he's seen a ghost. Are you okay? I typed back quickly. I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I'm exactly where I belong. Another message. This one from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Fowler, this is Patricia Meek from the University Board. I was at the reception tonight. I wanted you to know that what you said was long overdue. Some of us have been wondering for years why you weren't more involved in university functions. Now we know. I stared at the message, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. Patricia Meek. I knew that name. She was one of the most influential members of the board, a woman whose opinion carried significant weight. If she was reaching out, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will begin momentarily. I made my way to the head table, where a small placard marked my seat. Dr. Helen Fowler, keynote speaker. Dr. Fowler. Not Mrs. Fowler, not Robert's mother, not Timothy's grandmother. Dr. Fowler, a woman who'd earned her title through decades of hard work and dedication. The evening began with the usual formalities: welcome remarks, acknowledgement of sponsors, presentation of the Foundation's annual report. I half listened, my mind still processing what had happened upstairs. Had I gone too far? Had I been too harsh? The rational part of my mind whispered that perhaps I could have handled it more diplomatically, but the stronger part of me, the part that had been silenced for too long, felt only satisfaction. I'd spoken my truth. I'd refused to accept their diminishment. I'd shown them exactly what they'd tried to exclude. And now, the Foundation president was saying, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Helen Fowler has spent 30 years transforming lives through education. She founded the Valley Adult Literacy Program in 1987 with just 12 students and 1 volunteer. Today, that program has grown to serve over 300 students annually, with a staff of 45 teachers and tutors. The applause was warm, appreciative. I looked out at the sea of faces, all turned toward the stage with genuine interest and respect. Dr. Fowler holds a master's degree in adult education from State University, where she also worked for 23 years as head librarian. She's received numerous awards for her work, including the National Adult Education Award, the State Literacy Achievement Award, and the Community Service Excellence Award. Awards I'd never mentioned to Robert or Diana. Achievements they'd never asked about. Recognition they'd never acknowledged. But perhaps most importantly, the president continued, Dr. Fowler has personally taught over 6,000 adults to read and write. 6,000 people who walked into her classroom believing they were too old, too busy, or too set in their ways to learn. 6,000 people who discovered that it's never too late to change your life. The applause grew louder, more enthusiastic. I saw people standing, the ovation building momentum as more and more guests rose to their feet. 6,000 people. The number that had meant nothing to Diana suddenly carried weight in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Helen Fowler. I stood and walked to the podium, my legs steady, my heart calm. The applause continued as I adjusted the microphone, as I looked out at the audience of educators, advocates, and community leaders who understood the true value of what I'd spent my life doing. Thank you, I said, and my voice carried clearly through the ballroom. Thank you for this incredible honor, and thank you for supporting the work that has been my passion for 30 years. The applause died down, and I began to speak. I told them about Margaret Todd Whitman, my first student, and the tears in her eyes when she read her first complete sentence. I told them about Warren Schmoke, the angry veteran who'd become a counselor and poet. I told them about the grandmother who'd learned to read so she could help her grandchildren with their homework, about the factory worker who'd gone on to become a supervisor, about the immigrant who'd mastered English and started her own business. Education, I said, is not about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about the courage to try, the persistence to continue, and the willingness to believe in yourself when others doubt you. As I spoke, I found myself thinking about the reception upstairs, about Diana's mortified face when I'd revealed my true accomplishments, about Robert's shame when confronted with his own ingratitude, about the guests who'd witnessed a woman they'd been taught to dismiss revealing herself to be far more accomplished than they'd ever imagined. I've learned, I continued, that the most important lesson we can teach isn't found in any textbook. It's the lesson of dignity. The understanding that every person has value, that every person deserves respect, that every person has the right to be seen for who they truly are, not who others assume them to be. The audience was completely quiet now, hanging on every word. I thought about Timothy, probably still upstairs trying to process what he'd witnessed. My beautiful, earnest grandson who'd never known that his parents had been actively excluding me from family events, who'd never suspected that his grandmother was considered an embarrassment. Too often, I said, we allow others to define our worth. We accept their limitations, their prejudices, their narrow vision of what we should be. But the truth is, we define ourselves. We choose our own value. We decide whether to shrink to fit their expectations or to stand tall in our own truth. I paused, looking out at the rapt faces before me. Tonight, I was reminded of something I'd almost forgotten. I was reminded that I am not just someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's inconvenience. I am Dr. Helen Fowler, educator, advocate, the woman who taught 6,000 people to read. The applause began again, building to another standing ovation. But this time, I barely heard it, because through the ballroom's glass doors, I could see a familiar figure standing in the hallway outside. Robert, my son, still in his ceremonial robes, his face pale and uncertain. He'd left his own reception, abandoned his distinguished guests, to come down here, to see for himself what his mother had become in the world beyond his narrow perspective. Our eyes met through the glass, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the polished dean, not the embarrassed son, but the little boy who used to help me grade papers at the kitchen table, the child who'd once told me he wanted to be just like his mom. I finished my speech to thunderous applause, accepted the foundation's highest honor, a crystal award that would sit on my mantelpiece next to the pictures of my students, and made my way through the crowd of well-wishers and admirers. Board members pressed business cards into my hands. Fellow educators shared stories of their own programs. Donors asked how they could support the literacy center. But my eyes kept drifting to the doorway, where Robert still stood, waiting. Finally, I excused myself from the conversations and walked toward him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own recognition of what he'd tried to dismiss. "Mom," he said quietly. "I had no idea. I never knew about the awards, the recognition." "You never asked," I replied, but without malice. The anger I'd felt earlier had been replaced by something deeper, a profound sadness for the relationship we'd lost, for the son who'd forgotten the woman who'd made his success possible. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I'm so sorry." I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd raised, this stranger he'd become. "I know you are, Robert, but sorry isn't enough anymore." He nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. "What can I do? How can I make this right?" I thought about the question, about the years of dismissal and exclusion, about the daughter-in-law who'd deemed me unsuitable for their company. I thought about Timothy, caught in the middle of a family conflict he'd never seen coming. "You can start," I said finally, "by remembering who you are, and where you came from, and who helped you get there." The celebration continued around us, but in that moment, it was just a mother and son, standing at the crossroads of a relationship that might still be salvageable. The question was whether Robert was ready to find his way back to the man I'd raised him to be. Whether he was ready to remember that sometimes, the most important lessons come from the people we're tempted to leave behind. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden, deadheading roses in the morning sun, when Timothy's car pulled into my driveway. He'd been calling every few days since the graduation, trying to understand what had happened, trying to process the revelation that his parents had been excluding me from family events for years. "Grandma Helen?" His voice carried across the yard, uncertain and tentative. This was the first time he'd visited in person since that night. I looked up from my roses, shading my eyes against the sun. "Timothy, sweetheart. What a lovely surprise." He walked toward me slowly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. At 22, he still looked like the little boy who used to help me plant tomatoes in this same garden, but there was something different in his eyes now. A new understanding, perhaps. Or maybe just the weight of difficult truths. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said without preamble. "About what you said at the reception. About how they treated you." I set down my pruning shears and gave him my full attention. "And what have you concluded?" "That I was blind," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That I never saw what was right in front of me. That while I was feeling sorry for myself about not having normal grandparents who spoiled me with expensive gifts, I had something much more valuable. I had a grandmother who actually gave a damn about who I was becoming." I felt my chest tighten. "Timothy?" "No, let me finish," he said, holding up his hand. "I need to say this. I've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about every family gathering, every holiday, every celebration. And you know what I realized? You were always there for the important stuff. You came to my high school graduation, my science fair presentations, my piano recitals. You remembered my birthday, my achievements, my failures. You listened when I called you crying about organic chemistry. You drove 3 hours to bring me homemade soup when I had the flu freshman year. Tears pricked at my eyes. You were my grandson. Of course I was there. But Mom and Dad weren't. Not really. They showed up for the big events, the photo opportunities, the things that looked good on social media. But they never really saw me. They saw Timothy the engineering student, Timothy the dean's son, Timothy the achievement. You saw Timothy the person." I reached out and took his hand. "You are a wonderful person, Timothy. You always have been." The night of graduation, after you left, everything fell apart upstairs. Diana was hysterical, crying about how she'd been humiliated. Dad was trying to calm everyone down, making excuses about family stress and misunderstandings. But Patricia Meek, she's on the board of trustees, she stood up and said something I'll never forget. I waited, watching his face. She said, "Robert, your mother just delivered the most powerful speech about dignity and respect I've heard in years, and she did it while being excluded from her own grandson's celebration. If you can't see the irony in that, then you're not the man I thought you were." I couldn't help but smile. Patricia Meek had always been direct. "Half the guests left after that," Timothy continued. "Just got up and walked out. Said they had other places to be. Dad's big networking event turned into a disaster." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I didn't intend to ruin your celebration." "You didn't ruin anything," Timothy said firmly. "You revealed something that was already broken. And honestly, it felt good to watch Diana squirm. She's spent years acting like she was better than everyone else, like she was doing us all a favor by associating with us. Turns out she was the one who should have been grateful." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning sun warming our faces. Then Timothy spoke again, his voice quieter now. "Dad wants to talk to you. He's been trying to work up the courage to call for 3 weeks. Diana's been, well, she's been impossible. Locked herself in the bedroom for 2 days, then went to stay with her sister in California. Said she couldn't face the embarrassment. And how do you feel about that?" Timothy was quiet for a long moment. "I feel like maybe it's time Dad remembered who he used to be. Before the title, before the big house, before Diana convinced him that his past was something to be ashamed of." Just then, another car pulled into the driveway. Robert's black sedan, pristine and expensive. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment before getting out, his movements hesitant and uncertain. "I called him," Timothy said quietly. "Told him I was coming to see you. He asked if he could come too." Robert approached us slowly, and I was struck by how much he'd aged in the past 3 weeks. There were new lines around his eyes, a stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who'd been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for letting me come." I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd raised, this stranger he'd become. I'm not sure I had much choice. "It's Timothy's decision, too." Robert nodded, then looked around the garden. "I'd forgotten how beautiful this place is. How peaceful. It's where I do my best thinking," I said. "Where I remember who I am when the world tries to tell me I'm someone else." He flinched at the words. recognizing the reference to his own behavior. "Mom, I need to tell you something. About Diana. About the way I've been acting. About all of it." I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging him. "I was ashamed," he said finally. "Not of you, but of myself. I was ashamed that I'd let Diana convince me that my past was something to hide. I was ashamed that I'd been weak enough to let her exclude you from our lives. I was ashamed that I'd become the kind of person who would hurt the woman who sacrificed everything for me. And now?" I asked. "Now I'm ashamed of different things. I'm ashamed that it took a public confrontation for me to remember who I am. I'm ashamed that I let my son grow up thinking his grandmother wasn't important enough to include in family celebrations. I'm ashamed that I never asked about your work, your achievements, your life outside of how it related to mine." He paused, struggling with the words. "I'm ashamed that I became exactly the kind of person you taught me never to be. Someone who judges others by their bank account or their address, instead of their character." The words hung in the air between us. Timothy looked back and forth between us, sensing the weight of the moment. "I've made a decision," Robert continued. "Diana and I are separating. She's made it clear that she can't accept the idea of having a working-class mother-in-law in her social circle. And I've made it clear that I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not." I felt a complex mix of emotions: surprise, sadness, and yes, a small measure of satisfaction. "Robert, I never wanted to break up your marriage." "You didn't break up anything," he said. "You revealed something that was already broken. Diana married the Dean of Engineering, not Robert Fowler. She married the title, the status, the social position. She never wanted the real me, and she certainly never wanted my family." "What will you do?" I asked. "I'm taking a sabbatical," he said. "The university has offered me a year to pursue research opportunities." Translation: they want me to disappear until the gossip dies down. But honestly, I think I need the time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone. Timothy stepped forward. "I've been accepted to graduate school at State University. I'm going to study renewable energy engineering. And I was hoping—" He looked at me with hopeful eyes. "I was hoping you might let me rent your guest room. I'd like to spend some time getting to know my grandmother properly." I felt tears threatening again. "Timothy, I would love that." "There's something else," Robert said. "The university has asked me to chair a new committee on community outreach. They want to expand the continuing education programs, particularly adult literacy. They've specifically requested that Dr. Helen Fowler be brought in as a consultant." I stared at him. "They want me to work with you?" "They want you to lead the program," he corrected. "I would just be the administrative liaison. It would be your show, your vision, your expertise." The offer was tempting, but I found myself hesitating. "Robert, I appreciate the gesture, but I won't be anyone's token appointment. I won't be brought in to make the family look good." "It's not about making anyone look good," he said earnestly. "It's about recognizing expertise where it exists. Patricia Meek has been pushing for this expansion for years. When she heard your speech at the Aurora Foundation dinner, she said it was exactly the kind of vision the university needed." I looked at both of them, my son, trying to find his way back to the man I'd raised him to be, and my grandson, eager to build a real relationship with me. 3 weeks ago, I'd been excluded from their world. Now they were asking me to lead it. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But there would be conditions." "Of course," Robert said quickly. "Whatever you need. I work my way. I hire my own staff. I design my own curriculum. And I won't tolerate any interference from people who think they know better than I do about adult education." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "And Robert, this isn't about forgiveness. This is about moving forward. You hurt me deeply, and that doesn't just disappear because you've had a change of heart." He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know I have to earn your trust back. I know I have to prove that I've changed." "Then prove it," I said simply. "Not with words, but with actions. Show me that you remember who you are. Show me that you remember who raised you." 3 months later, I stood in front of a classroom filled with adult learners, just as I had for 30 years. But this time, the classroom was in the university's new community education center, funded by a grant I'd written, staffed by teachers I'd hired, serving students I'd recruited. Timothy sat in the back, taking notes for his graduate research on educational access. Robert stopped by occasionally, always polite, always respectful, never trying to take credit for work that wasn't his. Diana had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The settlement was generous. She'd get the house, half the assets, and a comfortable alimony. But she'd lost the thing she'd valued most: the status, the social position, the ability to look down on others. As for me, I'd learned something important that night at Timothy's graduation. I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions. I'd learned that dignity wasn't something that could be given or taken away. It was something you claimed for yourself. I'd also learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about hurting the people who've hurt you. It's about refusing to let them diminish you. It's about standing in your truth, claiming your space, and showing the world exactly who you are. The woman who'd been told she didn't fit in with the dean's family had become the woman leading the dean's most important initiative. The grandmother who'd been excluded from her grandson's celebration had become his mentor and housemate. The mother who'd been dismissed had become the person her son was desperately trying to emulate. And in the end, that was victory enough.